Nicholas, do you concede that the government's consultation, in inverted commas, should have been better when it comes to the business community?
Look, I haven't been party to those discussions, so it's probably not for me to comment, but I have heard the comments of Paul Zara and others around consultations with the Victorian government. I think promisingly today, Daniel Andrews in a press conference has seemed to indicate that there may indeed be some flexibility around the roadmap. We are seeing numbers now, under 100. And the Premier did signal today that the milestones in the roadmap might not need to be strictly met before some of these restrictions could be lifted. So I think it's a day-by-day proposition at the moment, but certainly I'd say the message of business couldn't be louder, and I believe it is being heard at Spring Street.
Katie Allen, that's good news. If those benchmarks, which the Prime Minister said he hoped were the worst-case scenario, do in fact end up being just that.
Look, I think it's pretty clear that we are now starting to get control of the pandemic here in Victoria, but what the Premier hasn't offered is real hope with regards to the strategy out. Again, we're hearing someone who's not listening to the people of Victoria. What they want to hear is that we're not looking for perfection, we're looking for partnerships. We're looking for the Premier understanding that business and retail and consumers are going to be part of the road out of this pandemic. This is not just about health. This is also about the economy. This is not just about the direct effects of COVID. It's also about the indirect effects of COVID, which of course include not just people's lives, but their livelihoods and of course their mental health.
But you can understand his caution.
Well, actually, quite frankly, I've been saying this on this show for the last 6 weeks. Firstly, we had the quarantine fiasco and a white flag was put up. We now see that he's not had adequate contact tracing and he's putting up the white flag and going up to New South Wales for that. I'd like to hear him partnering with the experts about how to move out of this roadmap. And I actually think there's a lot of, issues in this roadmap that really don't make a lot of sense. I mean, gardeners who are on their own outside, why can't they go back to work? We know that from evidence overseas that hairdressers who've got COVID, who properly use a COVID-safe approach, can look after hundreds of clients without infecting them. So there are ways to do business. I'm not suggesting someone with COVID should be at work, just by the way, but, it's not a one-size-fits-all. Let's be targeted, as we've said with regards to track and tracing. Let's be targeted in this roadmap out as well.
As a medical professional and someone who spent a lot of your career in the health system, do you feel a sense of optimism about where Victoria is right now, Katie?
I feel a sense of optimism that finally Daniel Andrews has worked out that his track and tracing hasn't been good enough. He's now sending a team to New South Wales to understand how to do it better. A decentralised model is important. A digitalised model is important. And every case, every day. Now, I feel a sense of optimism that finally he's got it, which is fantastic from a track and trace point of view. I've been saying that from June 24th. We need more resources in track and tracing, a better strategy and a better system.
But
I do not feel confident about the roadmap out. I do not feel confidence that we need to go down to 5 cases a day. That is not what the federal government has said. It's been 10 cases a day. Why go further? He's got it on the wrong target. He actually doesn't realise that we've got to live with this virus and have a crack team that gets down to the detail that was required to get every case every day. And we're going to have to live with this virus for quite a long time to come.
Yeah, well, I think it's a point that many have made. In fact, on the day of the announcement, I noticed this was a point that was made by a journalist in Sydney from the Herald, pointing out that Sydney would be in curfew under the Victorian roadmap, Nick. Is it time for, you said that he's being flexible, but, does it have to have a wholesale rewriting elements of this roadmap?
Look, that is certainly a point that has been made by many, that why does Victoria or Melbourne need to have tougher restrictions in place, tougher milestones than Sydney, particularly when you remember in Melbourne, mask wearing is prevalent now. 100% of people out on the streets are wearing masks, and that is a proven factor in stopping contagion. So when you take that all into account, why does Melbourne need to have stricter lockdown provisions than Sydney. But look, I do need to pick Katie up on a point here. I do very much enjoy her educated and expert contributions on these segments, but I feel like she was making some partisan points there that do need to be addressed. I mean, I think that it's fair to say that there were issues with Victoria's contact tracing efforts early in the piece, but there has been a massive investment of resource and there has been a significant improvement. So we've got over 3,000 people involved in the contact tracing exercise. Yes, there's now a delegation travelling to Sydney, overseen by Alan Finkel, the chief scientist, to, as the Premier said, double, triple check that everything that's been done in Victoria is up to world's best standard, the so-called gold standard that's happening in New South Wales. But there's a real fundamental point here that we can't forget, and that is tracking and tracing 20 cases per day is a fundamentally different exercise, a fundamentally different mathematical exercise than when you've got 750 cases a day. When you've got 20 cases a day, you've got some 250 people you need to track and trace. When you've got 700 cases a day, it's somewhere between 7,000 and 17,000 cases you need to track and trace. And even the world's most well-resourced track and trace unit, as they saw in China, just cannot keep up at that level. So there was actually a set of circumstances in Victoria which made the operation of our tracking and tracing a fundamentally different exercise to what was going on in New South Wales.
Katie Allen, your response to that?
Look, June the 24th, there were less than 20 cases. And we saw in New South Wales there has been an overflow of cases from Victoria to New South Wales, and they've tracked and traced and kept the cases down. So in June the 24th, if you had the system in place, we wouldn't be where we are now. It's taken a long time to get it under control. And the reason it's taken a long time is the track and tracing hasn't been good enough. Now, yes, of course, 700 is an overwhelming situation, but we need to make sure we learn from those mistakes. That is not a partisan comment. I just want to be clear about this. I know Dan Andrews is doing his damnedest. I know that he wants to do the right thing by Victoria. It is not partisan to point out, as I have been for months now, it isn't good enough. That doesn't mean he's not trying his hardest, but we know he can do better, and we know he should have done better. That is not partisan, it's just fact.
Katie Allen, Nick Rees, thanks as always.